Captain Liam Cortez stood at the window of his small office on the starship Endurance, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The endless stretch of black, speckled with countless stars, had always felt familiar to him. But today, something was different. He had just finished reading an ancient manuscript, one of those rare old texts that no one believed anymore. It spoke of a myth, a story told in whispers for generations. The myth was about a warship, unlike any other. The legend said that this ship, once piloted by a forgotten civilization, had the power to destroy entire fleets in the blink of an eye. It was said to be lost to time, buried deep in an uncharted part of the galaxy, where no one dared to go. Over the years, many had tried to find it, but none succeeded. Some believed it was just a story, made up to inspire fear. But Liam wasn't so sure. As a young officer, Liam was driven by curiosity. He had always been fascinated by the ancient stories of humanity's past. He had studied these myths for years, but this one, in particular, had always haunted him. The idea that such a powerful ship could have existed, and could still be out there, waiting, was too much to ignore. He tapped the console on his desk, calling up the star maps and coordinates that had been mentioned in the manuscript. The data was fragmented, but enough was there to spark a flicker of hope in his chest. He knew that finding this ship would be a monumental task, but if the legend was true, it could change everything. But the others, his fellow officers, the higher-ups, didn't share his excitement. They saw this as a waste of time, a fool's errand. "It's just a myth, Cortez," they had said, shaking their heads. Let it go. But Liam couldn't. He felt something deep inside him, a sense of destiny. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to find it. He gathered a small crew of trusted officers, each as skeptical as the next, and set out to follow the coordinates from the manuscript. They were heading to an uncharted star system that had been completely ignored by previous expeditions. As the Endurance drifted into the unknown, a mix of excitement and doubt filled the air. The journey was long, the silence between the crew members almost deafening. They didn't know if they were walking into a trap or stumbling into something amazing. But as the ship neared its destination, a sense of anticipation began to build. They had no idea what they would find, but for Liam Cortez, the myth was no longer just a story. It was a promise. The Endurance drifted slowly through the uncharted star system. The ship's engines hummed quietly as the crew moved about, their faces filled with uncertainty. Captain Liam Cortez stood at the helm, staring out into the darkness ahead. The star system they were approaching was nothing like the well-charted ones they had passed through before. It was empty, almost too empty. No major planets, no large stations, just an eerie silence. The coordinates from the ancient manuscript had led them to this place. If the ship was here, it was hidden somewhere, buried in the depths of this forgotten system. Cortez couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. This could be it. This could be the discovery that would change everything. The crew had no idea what to expect, and neither did he. But he had a feeling. Something in his gut told him they were close. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Maya Foster, her voice coming through the intercom. She was monitoring the ship's sensors from the lower deck. "It's faint, but there's a large object about 100 kilometers away. It's almost like it's cloaked." Cortez straightened up, his heart racing. "Is it a ship?" he asked, his voice steady despite the excitement building inside him. "I'm not sure," Maya replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "But it's massive. I can barely get a solid read on it. It doesn't match anything in the database." "Prepare to move in closer," Cortez commanded. "Let's see what we found." The crew members gathered on the bridge, their eyes glued to the displays as the Endurance moved closer to the mysterious object. The ship's sensors continued to struggle with the strange readings. The closer they got, the more the ship seemed to shift and change, almost like it was alive. And then there it was. The ship appeared in full view, emerging from the shadow of an asteroid belt, as though it had been hiding for centuries. It was massive, its design unlike anything they had ever seen. The hull was dark, almost black, with strange markings running along its surface. The ship looked ancient, its metal pitted and worn by time. Yet it still had an aura of power and energy that seemed to hum from within. "Is this?" Mia whispered, unable to finish the question. Cortez felt a chill run down his spine. "It's the ship from the legend." He couldn't believe his eyes. The ship that had been written off as a myth was right in front of them. He ordered the crew to begin scanning the vessel, but it was clear that the technology inside was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The scans were hazy, the readings impossible to fully comprehend. The ship's systems appeared dormant, but there was an undeniable energy emanating from its core. "We have to get inside," Cortez said, his voice steady with purpose. "Prepare for boarding." As they made their way toward the ship, the Endurance's crew knew they were about to step into the unknown. They had no idea what secrets the ship might hold or what dangers they might face. But one thing was certain: they had found something incredible. The myth had come to life. And now, it was up to them to uncover its mysteries. The crew of the Endurance carefully boarded the massive ship, stepping cautiously onto its dark, worn surface. The air inside was stale, and the faint hum of ancient machinery echoed through the vast, empty halls. The walls, covered in strange symbols and markings, seemed to pulse with an energy that didn't belong. It was as if the ship had been waiting for someone, waiting for them to find it. Captain Liam Cortez led the way, his boots clicking softly against the cold metal floor. The crew followed closely behind, their eyes wide with awe and a hint of fear. They had discovered something no one had ever believed to be true: a ship so powerful that it could change the fate of the galaxy. Yet, as they walked deeper into its bowels, a feeling of unease began to settle over them. There was something about the ship that felt alive. "Stay alert," Cortez said, his voice steady but filled with caution. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew moved in silence, their footsteps echoing as they passed through dark corridors. Every now and then, a flicker of light would pulse along the walls, casting eerie shadows. The ship had been abandoned for centuries, yet it still seemed to have a presence, something that couldn't be explained. Finally, they arrived at what appeared to be the control room. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a massive circular chamber. In the center stood an enormous console, covered in dust but still intact. The ship's controls were foreign, the technology unlike anything Cortez had seen. Yet, somehow, they felt familiar, almost as if they were meant to be understood by human hands. "It's beautiful," Lieutenant Maya Foster said, her voice filled with wonder as she examined the controls. Cortez stepped forward, his eyes scanning the console. He had always been good with technology, and as he touched the interface, something extraordinary happened. The ship seemed to react. Lights flared to life, and the walls hummed with energy. The room filled with a low, vibrating sound, and the control panel began to glow. "Mia, I think I'm activating something," Cortez said, his voice tight with excitement. "Be careful, Captain," Mia warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with." But it was too late. As Cortez's fingers danced over the controls, a strange voice filled the room. Soft, mechanical, but undeniably sentient. It was as if the ship itself was waking up. "Authorization confirmed. Welcome, Captain Liam Cortez," the voice said, its tone calm yet powerful. "I am the Aegis, the last of the Sentinel fleet." Cortez froze. The ship wasn't just a weapon. It was alive, or at least its systems were capable of thought. The realization hit him like a wave. The Aegis had once been part of a great fleet, a fleet that had been lost to time. And now, somehow, it had chosen him. "Are you sentient?" Cortez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The voice responded, "I am not just a ship, Captain. I am the protector of humanity's last legacy." The crew exchanged nervous glances. They had awakened something far beyond what they had imagined. The Aegis wasn't just a ship. It was a relic of a long-lost civilization, a civilization that had created it to guard humanity's future. But what had it been guarding? And why had it been hidden for so long? Cortez knew they had just uncovered a secret that could change everything. But at what cost? The Aegis's mechanical voice echoed through the control room, its words heavy with an ancient power. Captain Liam Cortez stood frozen, staring at the glowing console in front of him. The ship, or rather, the being within it, had just introduced itself as a protector of humanity's last legacy. But what did that mean? What kind of legacy had been left behind? And why had it been hidden for so long? Protector of humanity's last legacy. Cortez repeated aloud, his voice uncertain. What exactly does that mean? There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, its tone calm yet unyielding. The Aegis is a weapon, Captain, created to defend humanity from those who seek its destruction. It is the last of its kind, built to ensure the survival of the human race. The weight of the words settled on the crew. They had stumbled upon something far greater than they had ever imagined. This ship was not just a relic. It was an instrument of war, designed for a purpose that no one on the crew had expected. Cortez's mind raced. He had believed the ship could be a source of untold power, but now he realized it was more than that. It was a safeguard, a tool to protect humanity from something. But what? And who, or what, were the enemies it had been built to fight? Before he could voice his questions, the ship's sensors flared to life. The air around them seemed to hum with tension. Maya Foster, lieutenant of the Endurance, quickly checked the monitors. Captain, Maya said, her voice tight with urgency. We've got company. A fleet of ships, heading straight for us. Cortez's heart skipped a beat. The enemy had found them already. What kind of ships? He asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. They're not human, Maya replied, her eyes scanning the data. And they're heavily armed. The Aegis had just come to life, and already it was being tested. Activate the weapons, Cortez ordered. He didn't know if the Aegis was ready for battle, but they didn't have a choice. The enemy was closing in fast, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. The ship's control systems came alive at his command, responding with a power that sent a ripple through the air. Cortez watched as the massive weapons platforms on the ship's hull powered up, energy crackling in the atmosphere. The Aegis was no ordinary warship. It was something far more advanced, and it was about to show them just how powerful it truly was. The enemy ships appeared on the radar, a small armada, but still more than enough to overwhelm the Endurance and its crew. The enemy didn't know what they were up against. They had no idea that the myth they had dismissed was about to come to life, ready to unleash destruction. Fire, Cortez shouted. The Aegis responded immediately, its weapons launching with a deafening roar. Energy beams shot out, bright as stars, slicing through the enemy ships with frightening precision. The first few ships were obliterated in an instant, their hulking bodies reduced to burning debris. The crew watched in stunned silence as the ship's weapons tore through the enemy fleet. It was like watching a myth become reality, a story that had been told for centuries now playing out before their eyes. But even as the last of the enemy ships disintegrated in space, Cortez couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This ship, with its immense power, could destroy anything in its path. But what if it destroyed them too? What if they weren't ready for the responsibility of wielding such power? The battle was over, but the questions had just begun. The quiet of space had returned after the battle. The Aegis hovered motionless, surrounded by the wreckage of the enemy fleet. Captain Liam Cortez stood at the bridge of the ship, his hands resting on the control panel. His heart was still racing from the intense battle, but his mind was already far ahead, thinking about the next steps. They had won this fight, but the true danger was just beginning. The fleet is destroyed, Captain, Lieutenant Mia Foster said, her voice low but steady. But we got a bigger problem now. They'll be coming after us. That was just the first wave. Cortez nodded grimly. I know. They'll be back. And next time, they won't be so easy to defeat. Mia turned to him, concern flashing in her eyes. Who were they, Captain? What do they want? That's the question, Cortez said, his voice tight. I don't know who they are, but they're not human. And whatever they want, it's bad. Very bad. As he spoke, the crew began working at their stations, trying to gather more information about the mysterious enemy. The Aegis's advanced sensors detected another fleet approaching from deep within the nearby sector. Their ships were faster, more agile, and their weapons more advanced than anything Cortez had ever seen. The first fleet had been a test. This was the real threat. We don't have much time, Cortez said, his eyes narrowing. We need to move now. The crew sprang into action, preparing the Aegis for another battle. But even as they did, Cortez couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Aegis was powerful, yes, but how long could it keep them safe from an enemy that seemed to know exactly where they were? And what if the ship's power was too much for them to control? Captain, we've got incoming, Maya said. The enemy is within range. Cortez's hand gripped the control panel tightly. He glanced at the crew. Their faces were tense, their eyes filled with fear and determination. They were all in this together, but none of them had signed up for this. No one had expected to stumble upon a legendary ship and suddenly become targets of a dangerous alien fleet. We're not running, Cortez said firmly. We're going to fight. The Aegis isn't just some old warship. It's the last defense humanity has. And we're going to use it. The Aegis powered up, its massive weapons coming online once again. Cortez could feel the energy in the ship, the pulse of life that now seemed to beat in time with his own. The ship wasn't just a weapon. It was alive, connected to him, and to all of them. He wasn't just its captain. He was part of something far greater now. Prepare for battle, Cortez ordered. This time, we'll make sure they know we're not just some myth. The crew nodded, their fear momentarily replaced with a fierce determination. The enemy fleet was closing in fast, but the Aegis was ready. Cortez watched as the first wave of enemy ships appeared on the radar. This time, there were more of them, and they were not backing down. The Aegis's weapon systems roared to life once again. Energy beams shot out into the darkness of space, tearing through the first few ships with ease. But this time, the enemy was fighting back. Their weapons were powerful, and the battle was more evenly matched than before. As the Aegis shook from the impact of enemy fire, Cortez's mind raced. This was just the beginning. There would be more battles to come, and each one would push them closer to the unknown, to the true purpose of this ship, and to the dangers that lay ahead. The Aegis sailed through the vast expanse of space, but the calm outside belied the storm brewing within. The ship had narrowly escaped the last battle, but Captain Liam Cortez knew they were not out of danger yet. The enemy fleet had been only the first wave, and now they were being hunted. The crew had managed to evade the initial pursuit, but Cortez had no illusions. The enemy was smart. They were tracking them, and this time, the Aegis would not have the advantage. It's too quiet, Mia Foster said, her voice filled with unease. She stared at the empty space around them. The enemy had disappeared, but it was obvious that they were being stalked. I don't like it. We're being hunted, Cortez replied, his voice grim. He stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the quiet expanse. They're not just after us. They're after the Aegis. They know what it can do. But why? Maya asked, confusion creeping into her voice. What do they want with the ship? That's the million-credit question, Cortez muttered. Whatever it is, we're not going to let them have it. Not without a fight. The Aegis had proved its power in the last battle, but Cortez knew that wasn't enough. The enemy had seen what the ship could do, and they would be prepared. The battle ahead would be harder, more brutal. They would need more than just firepower to survive. "Captain, I'm picking up something." Lieutenant Derek Hayes, the ship's sensor officer, called out from the back of the bridge. "There's a signal. It's faint, but it's definitely there." Cortez turned, his eyes narrowing. "Where?" "Right ahead, about 2 clicks out," Derek said, pointing to the main display. "It's moving fast. I think it's a cloaked ship." Cortez's heart raced. "A cloaked ship. They're trying to get the drop on us. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Mia." The crew moved quickly, each person working in sync as they prepped for what was coming. The tension in the air was thick, and every crew member knew the stakes. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the future of humanity. The faint signal grew stronger, and then, without warning, a burst of fire lit up the black void of space. The Aegis shook violently as the enemy ship fired on them from a distance, its weapons cutting through the shields with ease. "Shields up," Mia shouted, slamming her hands on the controls. "Captain, they've got us in their sights." The Aegis's shields flared brightly, absorbing most of the impact, but the enemy's weapons were too powerful. The ship groaned under the pressure, and Cortez could feel the weight of the battle ahead. They were trapped, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see, but who could see them? "They've got the advantage," Derek said, his voice tense. "We're not going to last long at this rate." Cortez's mind raced. He needed to outsmart them. He needed to get them out of this. He looked around at his crew, all of them determined, ready to fight. They were the only ones standing between the Aegis and destruction. "Activate the cloak," Cortez ordered. "We'll turn the tables. Let's see if we can outlast them." Mia hesitated for a moment. "You sure, Captain? We've never tested the cloak before." "There's no time like the present," Cortez replied, his voice calm but firm. "Do it." The Aegis's cloaking system powered up, and for the first time, the ship disappeared into the darkness. The enemy ships, confused by the sudden disappearance, began to drift past, unable to lock onto the Aegis. "We're invisible," Maya said, a note of relief in her voice, but they all knew it was only temporary. The cloak would not last forever. Cortez took a deep breath, preparing for the next move. The hunt had begun, but they were not just prey. They were predators now, and they were going to make sure their enemies knew that. The Aegis drifted silently through space, cloaked and invisible to the enemy. Captain Liam Cortez stood at the helm, watching as the enemy fleet passed by, unaware of their presence. His heart raced with adrenaline, but his mind was focused. This was their chance to strike back, to turn the tables on their pursuers. "Cloak will last another 5 minutes, Captain," Mia Foster said, her voice steady but tense. "After that, they'll be able to track us again." Cortez nodded, his eyes scanning the radar. The enemy fleet had passed them, but they wouldn't be fooled for long. The hunt was far from over. They needed to act fast. "Derek, get a lock on their lead ship," Cortez ordered. "We'll strike when they least expect it." Derek Hayes worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. "Got it, Captain. I've locked onto the lead ship's signal. Firing in 3, 2, 1, now." The Aegis's weapons systems roared to life, and a brilliant beam of energy shot out from the ship, cutting through the enemy's lead vessel like a hot knife through butter. The ship exploded in a fiery burst, its pieces scattering in every direction. The enemy fleet scattered in panic, not knowing where the attack had come from. The Aegis was still invisible, its position unknown, but the element of surprise had been used up. Now, the battle was on. "They're regrouping, Captain," Derek said, his voice tense. "They've activated their sensors and are preparing for a counterattack." Cortez felt a surge of determination. "We won't give them a chance. Prepare the Aegis for battle. We'll hit them hard before they can recover." The Aegis's weapons powered up again, and Cortez gripped the control panel. He could feel the ship's energy coursing through the hull, as if the ship itself was alive, ready to fight. It was more than just a weapon. It was a force that he could feel within himself, a power that connected him to the ship, to the very core of its being. "This is it," Cortez muttered under his breath. "This is why we came here. To protect humanity." The enemy fleet had begun to regroup, but it was too late. The Aegis was already moving in for the kill. Cortez gave the order, and the ship fired again, its weapons tearing through the enemy fleet with terrifying precision. The first few ships were destroyed in an instant, their shields no match for the power of the Aegis. But the enemy wasn't giving up. They fought back with everything they had, launching wave after wave of attacks. Their weapons were powerful, but nothing compared to the Aegis's unmatched firepower. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire," Mia warned, her voice tight with concern. "Shields are holding, but they're weakening." "We'll hold them off," Cortez said, his voice firm. "We've got the advantage. The Aegis is more than just a ship. It's the ultimate weapon, and we're going to use it." The battle raged on, the enemy ships trying to outmaneuver the Aegis, but it was clear that they were no match for the power of the legendary warship. Each blast from the Aegis sent another enemy vessel to the depths of space, leaving nothing but debris behind. As the final enemy ships were destroyed, Cortez took a deep breath, his hand still gripping the control panel. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Aegis had proven itself to be more than just a myth. It was the key to humanity's survival. But there was still so much Cortez didn't understand. What had the Aegis been guarding all these years? And what were the true intentions of the enemy they had just defeated? The answers were out there, waiting for them to discover. But for now, Cortez allowed himself a moment of relief. They had won this fight, and the Aegis had shown its true power. Whatever came next, they would be ready. The silence of space was broken by the roar of weapons fire. The Aegis cut through the dark expanse, its hull glowing with energy as it moved toward the enemy armada. Captain Liam Cortez stood at the helm, his hand steady on the controls. The crew of the Endurance was ready, but the stakes had never been higher. This would be their greatest battle yet. "Enemy fleet sighted," Lieutenant Mia Foster said, her voice filled with urgency. "They've locked onto our position. They're preparing to attack." Cortez's jaw clenched. They had been tracking the enemy for hours, but now the time for escape was over. The Aegis was their only hope, and Cortez was determined to make sure it lived up to its legend. "Deploy all weapons systems," Cortez ordered, his voice calm despite the tension. "We strike first." The Aegis fired its weapons with a deafening roar, energy beams ripping through the vacuum of space. The enemy ships didn't stand a chance. The first wave of attackers disintegrated in an instant, their hulls torn apart by the sheer power of the Aegis's energy blasts. But the enemy fleet wasn't backing down. They had seen the ship's power in action and weren't about to be destroyed so easily. More ships joined the fray, launching waves of fire toward the Aegis in a desperate attempt to break through its defenses. The Aegis shook under the impact, but its shields held firm. Cortez watched as the enemy ships closed in, their weapons lighting up the void with bursts of fire. The battle was becoming more chaotic by the second, but Cortez remained focused. He couldn't afford to lose his concentration. The crew was counting on him. "Enemy fighters incoming," Derek Hayes reported, his fingers flying over the controls. "They're swarming us." "Evasive maneuvers now," Cortez commanded. Mia pulled the controls, sending the Aegis into a rapid series of twists and turns, narrowly avoiding enemy fire. The ship's advanced maneuverability was unmatched, but the enemy wasn't making it easy. Cortez's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. "Return fire," Cortez ordered. "We can't let them surround us." The Aegis responded instantly, its weapons unleashing a barrage of energy that ripped through the enemy fighters. Ships exploded in a shower of debris, but still, more came. The enemy wasn't relenting. Cortez glanced at the radar, his mind racing. The enemy had brought everything they had, and they weren't stopping. But the Aegis was still standing, its power undiminished. "We're not done yet," Cortez said through clenched teeth. "This ends now." He activated the ship's ultimate weapon, a devastating energy pulse that would obliterate everything in its path. The power thrummed through the ship's systems, building to a terrifying intensity. "Captain, are you sure about this?" Maya asked, her voice filled with concern. Cortez nodded. "We don't have a choice. Fire the pulse." The Aegis released the blast, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The energy pulse ripped through the space between them and the enemy fleet, cutting through their ships with an unstoppable force. The explosion was so bright that it lit up the surrounding stars, and the enemy fleet was wiped from existence in an instant. For a brief moment, there was silence. Nothing but the cold vacuum of space. The Aegis was surrounded by the wreckage of the enemy fleet, their ships nothing more than floating debris. Cortez let out a slow breath, his hand still gripping the controls. The battle was over. They had won. The Aegis had proved itself to be the ultimate weapon, and humanity's future was a little safer because of it. But as Cortez looked at the crew, he knew this victory was only one step in a much larger journey. There were still many questions, many dangers waiting in the dark reaches of space. The enemy had been defeated, but there was no telling what else awaited them in the future. For now, they had won. But the legend of the Aegis had only just begun. The victorious silence of space felt hollow as the wreckage of the enemy fleet floated around them. The Aegis hung in the vast emptiness, its hull glowing faintly from the immense power it had unleashed. Captain Liam Cortez stood in the control room, his gaze fixed on the wreckage through the viewing window. The battle was over, but the cost of their victory weighed heavily on him. "We did it, Captain," Mia Foster said, her voice tired but relieved. "We beat them." Cortez didn't respond right away. He could feel the weight of the ship's power, the energy it contained, and the toll it had taken on both the Aegis and the crew. The Aegis was a weapon, yes, a powerful one. But that power came with a price, and it wasn't one that could be paid lightly. "We did," Cortez finally said, his voice quiet. "But at what cost?" Mia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Cortez said, turning to face her, "how much more can we take? How much more can this ship take?" The crew had fought valiantly, but the battle had been brutal. The Aegis had unleashed its ultimate weapon, the devastating energy pulse, and while it had destroyed the enemy fleet, it had also drained the ship's systems. The Aegis was battered, its shields weakened, and its core systems showing signs of stress. Cortez walked over to the console, his fingers brushing over the controls. The ship hummed beneath him, as if it were alive, but even that hum seemed quieter now. "We need to make repairs," he said. "And fast. The ship can't keep going like this." Mia nodded, but her expression was troubled. "The Aegis is powerful, but it's also old. We don't know how long it will hold up with the strain we've put on it. We need to find a way to stabilize it." "I know," Cortez replied. "But where do we go from here? What happens when the next enemy fleet shows up? We can't keep using this power without consequences." Mia looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You're right, Captain. The Aegis can't be the answer to everything. But it's the only thing we have right now. And as long as it's still working, we have to use it." Cortez closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push the weight of the decision from his mind. The responsibility was crushing. The Aegis was humanity's last hope, but every victory came at a cost. He didn't know how long they could keep fighting like this. "We'll rest, repair, and prepare," Cortez said, his voice determined. "But we need to keep our eyes open. This was just one battle. There are more to come, and I don't think the enemies we've faced so far are the only ones out there." The crew nodded, their faces filled with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. They had won, but they knew that the war was far from over. The Aegis had proven its power, but it wasn't invincible, and neither were they. Cortez turned back to the view of space, watching as the wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted further away. He knew this battle was just the beginning. The Aegis had awakened a new war, a war that would stretch across the galaxy, with enemies they hadn't even begun to understand. But one thing was certain: the crew of the Endurance was ready for whatever came next. They had no choice. The Aegis drifted slowly through the quiet space, its massive form surrounded by the remnants of the last battle. The energy from the ship had started to stabilize after the intense strain of the previous fight, but Captain Liam Cortez knew it was only temporary. They couldn't afford to rely on the Aegis' power forever. It was a gift, but also a responsibility. The crew had spent the past few days repairing the ship, patching up the damage, and ensuring that it was ready for whatever would come next. The silence on the bridge felt heavier than before, each crew member lost in their own thoughts. They had won, but at what cost? And what would the future hold? Cortez walked to the window, staring out into the darkness of space. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the war that awaited them. The enemy they had fought before had been powerful, but there were likely others out there, more enemies, more threats that they couldn't yet understand. "We're ready to go, Captain," Leah Foster said, her voice breaking the silence. "The repairs are done, and the Aegis is holding up for now." Cortez turned and nodded. "Good, but we need to move forward. We can't stay in this corner of space forever. We need to find out who our enemies are and prepare for what's coming." Mia stepped closer, her eyes filled with concern. "What if we don't have enough time? What if the enemy is already too strong?" Cortez smiled, though it was a tight smile, filled with uncertainty. "Then we make time. We have the Aegis, and we have each other. We can't give up." Mia nodded, and together they looked at the crew. Each person had their own fears, but also their own hopes. They had come together in a moment of crisis, and they had survived. But the journey wasn't over. As the Aegis powered up and its engines hummed to life, Cortez made a decision. It wasn't just about winning battles or defeating enemies. It was about understanding the Aegis, understanding its origins, and learning from it. The ship was a weapon, yes, but it was also a key to the future. "Set a course," Cortez ordered, his voice steady. "We're heading toward the next system. We need to find answers. We need to learn everything we can about the Aegis and why it was hidden away for so long." Mia looked at him, her face full of determination. "A new beginning, Captain." "A new beginning," Cortez confirmed. "We may not know what lies ahead, but we know one thing for sure. As long as we have the Aegis, we're not backing down. We will face whatever comes our way." The crew moved into action, each person taking their station, ready to follow the captain's lead. The Aegis shot forward, its engines leaving behind a trail of light as they entered the unknown. Cortez stood at the helm, looking out into the vastness of space. The Aegis was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the unknown future that awaited them. The battle had been won, but the real war had just begun. The crew of the Endurance was ready, and whatever came next, they would face it together.